I still remember that morning clearly, the moment when everything I believed about my life crumbled. If someone had told me that a single phone call could expose decades of lies, I would have laughed. Until I heard the voice on the other end, revealing that the man who raised me, who I thought was my father, had been hiding the truth for 28 years. That was the day I discovered that my entire identity was built on a foundation of secrets. I met Harrison on a crisp October day when red leaves painted the sidewalks of Seattle. I was a freelance photographer, recently returned from a year abroad documenting wildlife in Costa Rica. He was Harrison Blackwood, heir to Blackwood Industries, a pharmaceutical empire spanning from Seattle to Miami. But I didn't know any of that when we first crossed paths at a small gallery opening downtown. Back then, Harrison was just a thoughtful man with kind green eyes and a quiet smile, not someone carrying the weight of billions in family wealth. Before we continue with today's story, if you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber helps me keep sharing these inspiring tales that touch your day. Thank you for your support. We fell in love the way people do when they find their missing piece. Harrison wasn't like other wealthy men I'd met through my photography work. He never flaunted his fortune, never acted entitled. Instead, he was genuine, passionate about environmental causes, and made me feel like I was the center of his universe. Those early months together were pure magic. I loved him completely, never imagining that love alone wouldn't be enough to withstand the devastating secret his family had been guarding. When I became pregnant, Harrison was ecstatic. He held me close and promised we'd build something beautiful together. But promises crumble when they're built on lies. And Victoria Blackwood, his mother, was a woman who valued control above all else. I remember our first meeting at the Blackwood mansion, just 2 weeks after Harrison told his family about our pregnancy. The house was a monument to pharmaceutical wealth, marble floors reflecting crystal chandeliers, walls lined with awards and patents worth billions. The moment I stepped inside, I felt like an intruder. The staff moved silently through rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. Victoria sat in her study, surrounded by medical journals and financial reports, her steel blue eyes calculating every detail of my appearance. "So you're the photographer," she said, her voice clinical and precise. "Harrison tells me you specialize in wildlife?" I nodded, feeling the weight of her scrutiny. "I focus on conservation photography, documenting endangered species." "How quaint," she replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "And now you're documenting our family as well, I presume?" The conversation was brief but loaded with unspoken tension. Victoria said nothing directly hostile, but I knew from that moment she saw me as a threat to something much larger than I understood. Over the following weeks, Harrison began to change. He grew distant, preoccupied, constantly fielding calls from his mother. When I asked about it, he assured me everything was fine, but the shadow in his eyes told a different story. By the time I gave birth to our twins, Lily and James, I could feel the walls closing in. Harrison was still there, still loving toward the babies, but there was a distance between us that I couldn't bridge. Then came that terrible morning when everything shattered. Harrison entered our apartment, his face grave and hollow. I was feeding the twins when I saw his expression, and my blood turned to ice. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I placed the babies in their cribs and turned to face him, my heart already breaking. "What's wrong, Harrison?" He couldn't meet my eyes. I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I have to go." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Go? What do you mean?" "My mother, she's made some things clear. About our future. About what's expected of me." His voice cracked. "I have responsibilities, to the company, to the family legacy." Tears streamed down my face as the reality sank in. You're leaving us? Your own children. Harrison looked at me with tortured eyes. I'm sorry, Sarah. I never wanted it to end this way. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with 2 newborns and a shattered heart. The days that followed were the darkest of my life. I could barely function, surviving on maybe 2 hours of sleep, living on crackers and coffee. My body ached from childbirth, but the emotional pain was far worse. I felt like I was drowning, but then one night, as I held my crying babies, something shifted inside me. These innocent souls needed me. If I collapsed, who would protect them? Who would love them the way they deserved? I dried my tears and made a promise. I would not let Harrison's abandonment destroy us. The next few months were a battle for survival. I picked up every photography gig I could find. Newborn portraits, family sessions, small weddings. The money was barely enough to cover rent and formula, but we were making it. I discovered I had a talent for newborn photography. Something about capturing those first precious moments resonated with parents. Word spread, and slowly, my client base grew. One evening, while editing photos of a client's baby, I received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was elderly, shaky. Is this Sarah Chen? The photographer. Yes, this is Sarah. How can I help you? My name is Eleanor Blackwood. I'm Harrison's grandmother. My breath caught. I'd heard Harrison mention his grandmother, but Victoria had always kept her isolated from family gatherings. I need to see you, Eleanor continued. There are things you need to know about Harrison, about why he really left. Mrs. Blackwood, I don't think that's a good idea. Harrison made his choice. Please, her voice cracked. What Victoria did to you, to your children. It's not the first time. And there's something else, something about your own family that you deserve to know. The cryptic nature of her words sent chills down my spine. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. 3 days later, I found myself in a small cafe across town, sitting across from a frail woman in her 80s. Eleanor Blackwood looked nothing like the powerful matriarch I'd imagined. She was thin, almost fragile, with kind eyes that reminded me of Harrison. Thank you for coming, she said, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her tea. I know this must be difficult. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm not sure what you think I need to know, but Harrison and I are over. I've moved on. Eleanor studied my face carefully. Have you ever wondered why Victoria reacted so strongly to your relationship? Why was she so determined to separate you from Harrison? I shrugged. I assumed it was typical wealthy family snobbery. I wasn't good enough for her son. No, dear. Eleanor leaned forward. It wasn't about your social status. It was about your bloodline. My heart began to race. What do you mean? Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph, a picture of a young Asian woman standing beside a man in a lab coat. Do you recognize her? I stared at the photo, my breath catching. The woman looked exactly like me. Same eyes, same bone structure, same smile. Who is she? I whispered. Her name was Dr. Maylin Chen. She was a brilliant biochemist who worked for Blackwood Industries 30 years ago, and she was Harrison's father's first love. The world seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. My mother died when I was young. My father raised me alone. Eleanor's eyes filled with sadness. Sarah, the man who raised you wasn't your biological father. He was Dr. Chen's research partner, and he agreed to take you in when she died. I felt like I couldn't breathe. You're saying, my mother worked for the Blackwoods? More than that. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. Your mother discovered something that would have destroyed Blackwood Industries. She found evidence that several of their medications were causing severe side effects the company was hiding from the FDA. My hands began to shake. What happened to her? She was going to expose them. She had documented everything, but the night before she was supposed to testify. Eleanor's voice broke. There was a car accident. Brake failure, they said. The implication hit me like a lightning bolt. You think they killed her? Eleanor nodded slowly. I've suspected it for years. And when Victoria realized who you were, when she saw your face and made the connection, she wanted me gone, I finished. Because I look just like her. Because you are her daughter. And if anyone ever made the connection, if they realized Dr. Chen's daughter was alive. Eleanor gripped my hand. You could expose everything your mother died trying to reveal. I sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what I'd just learned. My entire life had been a lie. The man I thought was my father, my mother's death, even Harrison's abandonment, all connected to a conspiracy that had been buried for decades. There's more, Eleanor continued. Your mother hid copies of her research. She knew she was in danger. Before she died, she gave everything to your father, the man who raised you. She made him promise to keep you safe. Where is it? I asked, my voice barely audible. I don't know, but I think she left clues. Things only you would understand. I left that cafe feeling like I was walking in a dream. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my identity, it was all unraveling. That night, I called the man who raised me, the only father I'd ever known. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. There was a long pause. What is it, sweetheart? Was she really my mother? The silence stretched on for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him sigh, a sound so heavy it seemed to carry decades of secrets. Who told you? He asked quietly. Dad, please. I need to know everything. Over the next hour, he told me the truth. My mother, Dr. Malin Chin, had been his research partner and closest friend. When she discovered the Blackwood cover-up, she'd been terrified for her life, and for mine. She made me promise to raise you as my own, he said, his voice thick with emotion. To keep you away from anything connected to Blackwood Industries. She said they would never stop hunting her family if they knew you existed. Where's her research, Dad? I don't know. She said she hid it somewhere safe, somewhere you would find it when you were ready. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment staring at my sleeping twins. They were part of the Blackwood legacy, but they were also the granddaughter and grandson of a woman who had died trying to expose the truth. I made a decision that night. I wouldn't just survive. I would finish what my mother started. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of investigation. I used my photography connections to access old newspaper archives, medical journals, and corporate records. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to reconstruct my mother's research. I found patients who had suffered from the covered-up side effects, families who had lost loved ones to medications they thought were safe. I documented their stories, their pain, and their need for justice. But I still hadn't found my mother's hidden research until I was going through old photo albums my father had kept. There, tucked behind a picture of my mother and me as a baby, was a tiny key and a note in my mother's handwriting. For Sarah, when she's ready to see the truth. Storage Unit 247, West Side Self-Storage. The combination is her birthday. My hands trembled as I drove to the storage facility. Inside Unit 247, I found boxes of documents, photographs, and medical records, everything my mother had compiled before her death. The evidence was devastating. Blackwood Industries had known about the side effects for years, had actively suppressed studies, bribed officials, and silenced whistleblowers. Thousands of people had suffered, and my mother had died trying to expose it. But now I had everything. And I was going to finish what she started. I contacted investigative journalists, medical ethics boards, and the FDA. I provided them with copies of everything, 30 years of evidence that would finally bring Blackwood Industries to justice. The scandal broke 3 months later. Headlines across the country exposed the cover-up, the corruption, the decades of lies. Blackwood Industries stock plummeted. Victoria Blackwood was arrested on charges of conspiracy and fraud. And Harrison. Harrison tried to reach out to me. "Sarah, please," he said when he called. "I know I hurt you, but I never knew about any of this. I was just following my mother's orders." "Your mother killed mine," I replied calmly. "She stole my identity, my family, my history. And you helped her by abandoning your own children. I want to make it right. I want to be part of their lives." I looked at my twins, now 6 months old, playing on their blanket. They deserved better than a father who had chosen wealth over family. "You made your choice, Harrison. Now live with it." I hung up and never looked back. The legal settlements from the Blackwood case were substantial, enough to secure my children's future and mine. But more importantly, I had given voice to all the victims who had suffered in silence for decades. I used some of the settlement money to start a foundation in my mother's name, providing support for families affected by pharmaceutical negligence. I combined it with my photography work, documenting the stories of survivors and keeping my mother's legacy alive. Today, as I watch my children play in our sunny backyard, I think about the journey that brought us here. Harrison lost everything: his family fortune, his reputation, his children. Victoria is serving a lengthy prison sentence. But I gained something more precious than any inheritance. I found my mother's truth, my own strength, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to be silenced. My children will grow up knowing their grandmother was a hero and that their mother finished what she started. Justice, it turns out, is worth more than any amount of money, and some legacies are worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes. What do you think about Sarah's journey? Was exposing the truth worth the cost? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow for more stories about courage triumphing over corruption.